Good morning, everybody, and welcome on this snowy day, depending on where you are, to the Social Work Services Committee of Tuesday, the 2nd of February 2021. We've got a number of items of business for today, and I think the first item will be, as chair, just to approve the participation online in this meeting for members. So happy to do that. If I could ask also for the cedar and apologies for today. Claire, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. We've currently got 3 members not present, being Councillors Charteris, McClelland and Sloan, all others present on Teams.
Okay. Thanks, Claire. I know Councillor McClelland had asked for an alternative link to the meeting, so he was able to join due to connection issues. So hopefully he'll be able to join in due course. Thank you. I can see a hand raised, so do forgive me, because ideally if during the meeting you want to speak, if you could indicate that by typing in the chat function. I will try and keep track of hands that are raised, and hopefully if I miss anybody, then Claire can assist and remind me. But that's probably the best and most effective way to get noticed. I can't see whose hand's raised there. Are you able to advise me, Claire?
Oh, Councillor McClelland's just joined the meeting.
Okay. So I think that's he is now down as unknown user. So that'll be his name from now on. Thank you. So with that, do we have any declarations of interest? Okay, I can't see any comments or hands raised, so we'll press on then. We've got the minute of the meeting from the 3rd of November. That's for noting. Are we happy to note?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. So if we move on to the first item of substantive business, which is the Social Work Services Revenue Budget Monitoring Report 2021 for the period ended 31st of December. Report by Chief Social Worker, but with Social Work Officer, but we've got Janet Sutton here from the Finance to speak to this report. Do members have any questions on this? Or Janet, would you like to add anything in the first instance to the report?
I've nothing to add to the report, Chair.
Okay, thank you. With that, then over to members. Any questions on this one? Okay, I think Councillor Wood, did you raise your hand?
Yes, Chair, actually I did. Yep. So thank you very much for bringing us in. It was on page 13 when we're looking at the COVID financial pressures. It was really just seeking clarification on early effective interventions. Where are we with the recruitment at this stage? Because obviously we haven't recruited everybody as we haven't exhausted the funding. And because we haven't exhausted the budget, does this get carried forward? Then the other point I would like to ask is reduction in expenditure. What are the alternative measures being mentioned in the last statement?
Okay, thanks, Councillor Wood. Janet, are you able to answer the finance-related questions? And Lillian, if you can come in for anything related to the service.
Yeah, I certainly will. Yeah. You happy for me to take it, Janet? Or
Yes, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Wood. In terms of your first question around the early and effective intervention team, we have now fully recruited to that team, and that team has been fully functioning since mid-December. So what will happen is that the overall request from and agreed through full council was for a 3-year period of funding. So that funding will be used over that period of time, and clearly we will utilise that funding for making sure that we deliver the most effective early and effective intervention. So fortunately the team are now fully up and running they have been certainly doing some additional tasks, a significant amount of additional tasks, just given some of the pressures that we're facing as a service due to the ongoing response to COVID for our children and families. So hopefully that confirms your first question. And then just in terms of the anticipated social work service surplus, what we have been doing, and obviously Janet can confirm that this budget is the most up-to-date element of the current analysis of our financial situation. But what we have been doing is redeploying some resources to try and assist and help the demand. So one very, very small example would be that we've had to enhance our out of hours service because we have had a huge increase in referrals in those periods of time that would be out with our normal business. So some of that resource will have to go towards that additional funding, both in terms of staffing costs and the support to families and children and the wider social work service. Happy to give any further clarity. Thank you, Chair.
Chair.
Councillor Wood, was this to do with the measures taken in terms of reductions?
That is correct, yes. And it was to try and identify whether if these measures, whatever they might be, will be continued in the future.
Okay, now I'm not sure if that's a finance or an operational issue, Lillian, but is that something you can assist with in terms of what measures have been taken to reduce certain costs?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that at this moment in time it's an operational challenge to keep meeting the demand, the resources that are required to try and deal with the referrals that have significantly increased. So any underspend that we have in any other aspect of the budget due to COVID is being redirected to meet the frontline response at the moment. And whilst we are managing that response just now, I have to be absolutely clear with members that it's getting more and more challenging because the referrals are significantly increased on certainly on this time last year. And a small example would be during our public protection period, we had over a 40% increase for all care for all functional services within social work. So we are having a huge demand on our service, and any resource that's available is being redirected to that frontline response. Clearly, Janet can, if required, talk through what that means for the budget, but that's certainly how we are utilising that resource to balance the books overall and try and meet the demand. Thank you.
Thanks, Lillian. Is there anything you wanted to add there on any specifics, Janet?
I think just to add that the reductions in expenditure can be reflected in things like a reduction in staff travel, in admin costs where we've not had as much expenditure on that kind of thing with people working from home and working more remotely. And it's a whole range of things that we've been able to, and we've been very careful to capture all of those to help offset the other expenditure items, and that's why that line is there showing as an offset.
Thanks, Janet. Does that assist, Councillor Wood?
That is actually, Chair, very, very helpful. And it would appear, just from what I've heard, that we have pretty well plateaued. We're not going to see much more in the way of reductions. In fact, it's going to be turning the opposite direction. Would I be correct in that assessment?
Well, Lillian, do you want to?
Yeah, absolutely, Councillor Wood. We are planning just now effectively on a weekly basis. So the senior leadership team for social work are meeting every week to try and look at the increased demand. We are clearly concerned around the next 4 to 6 weeks, which are traditionally a very challenging and difficult time for us over the winter months, particularly for adult services, but certainly for children's services, this demand is unprecedented. We are very worried about the impact of the pandemic on our young people, on their mental health, on domestic abuse, and I suppose every aspect of public protection. So we're meeting on a weekly basis to try and just make sure that we are using the really stretched resources that we have to try and meet that demand and make sure that we are continuing continuing to see our most vulnerable and offer as much support as we possibly can. The projected figures, if they keep going the way that they're currently going, we think we've probably got another 4 to 6 weeks of continued increase. So I am particularly concerned over the next couple of months, and as a team, we're just trying to make sure that we do things as effectively as we possibly can, and we are doing things very differently. So we've extended our out of hours service, we have extended our access team, we've extended the MASH to be working an 8 to 8 pattern. Our staff are currently working 7 days a week, and we have gone into a 3 rotation period. So staff are having a blended approach to working at home, working in the office, and being available on standby. So the demands for the service has grown significantly. There is many new areas of responsibility that are currently sitting within social work services. So the short answer, sorry, I'm a bit long-winded there, but the short answer is we expect the demand to increase. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Lillian and Janet. That was very, very helpful. So much appreciated.
Thanks, Councillor Wood, and thanks, Lillian. That really sets the tone for the type of environment everybody's working in. With that, though, I can see no other questions in the chat or hands up. Correct me if I'm wrong, please, Claire. So if we can proceed to the recommendations, which is to note the anticipated financial pressures associated with the COVID-19 pandemic, and also that based on the position as at the end of December 2020, that we're projected to break even against the 2020-21 service budget as reflected in the appendix. Are we happy to note those, members?
Noted.
Thank you. So that brings us on to item 5, which is an introduction to the Adult Support and Protection Biennial Report for 2018 to 2020. And this is obviously falls under responsibility of the Chief Social Work Officer. We have Rosie Black on the line, able to speak to this report. Rosie, is there anything you'd like to add to the report before we open to members for questions?
No, but happy to answer any questions that anyone wants to raise.
Thanks, Rosie. So over to members then. Any questions or comments on the reports as presented? So I can see Jane Maitland, Councillor Maitland, a question, please.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I was going to ask if we could have a little bit of expanse on the issue of hoarding. I noticed that this had come up as something that was launched, particularly focusing on it's a care issue, and I wonder if we could have a little bit of an expansion on how this is working and really what we can expect to see in terms of help being offered.
Yes, well, the launch has been a successful launch. It provides the pathway for our partners to work together to look at self-neglect and hoarding. As you know, the prevalence is heightened and even increasing through COVID. So that pathway has been utilised just recently on a particularly complex situation. There are challenges, obviously, with people who have self-determination and maybe not wishing to engage, but with the pathway that allows us to work together in a much more streamlined fashion. So discussing complexities and hopefully good outcomes for the person. The strategy is available on the Public Protection website for people to view as well. Is that enough expanse, or would you like me to?
Thanks, Rosie. Councillor Maitland, was there any specific details, or does that help give a bit more context?
No, it's just I was wondering why this has suddenly come up. I mean, you're talking about there's been with respect to COVID, and I was just wondering why this is. I mean, people have hoarded for years. I had an elderly relative who got himself into that situation. And you know, it's gone on for years, but I don't know why it suddenly kind of got to the top of the heap as being taken into account as a very specific issue.
It's the increased heightened prevalence of self-neglect and the awareness under adult support and protection that it's one of the categories that we need to look at under our duty to inquire. So it's legislation that we need to look at people who self-neglect and hoard and are unable to safeguard themselves. Sometimes people hoard and that's not an adult at risk of harm, but sometimes people hoard and are self-neglect and then it would come under that legislation. So it's a legislative requirement to ensure people are safe.
If I could come in as well, Chair, Councillor Maitland, if it would be helpful. I mean, we have had some significantly challenging cases that we've worked very effectively with our multi-agency partners. And as Rosie's quite rightly articulated, we do have that as part of our duties, but also some of these cases have become really problematic, both for the service user themselves, putting themselves at risk, but also some situations where they've put their neighbours or others at risk. So we recognised that we actually had quite a high prevalence in the region, and we had, as I say, some cases that were significantly challenging. So this was a real pragmatic approach to making sure that staff fully understood and that we've utilised the effect of the partnership to try and address those issues as well. So absolutely accept that it's something that's been around for a long time, but the coming together of the legislation change and being aware of some significant cases within the region had brought that to the fore. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you very much, Stephen. I wish in many ways that we've had this focus perhaps on one of the more famous cases that we had to deal with maybe about 5-6 years ago. But yeah, okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm wondering if I know there's been over the last few years there's been the development of the neglect hoarding sort of toolkit type things, and maybe that's started to become more of an available resource in terms of identifying and addressing these things. But maybe that's something that members might want a bit more information on, especially as Rosie was saying, it's now heightened in the current situation. So I don't know if that's something we could maybe I don't know if it's worth a sort of seminar or maybe some other form of information just to sort of alert members to the toolkit and the sort of the prevalence of hoarding in more detail as we go forward. But we'll leave that for now, I suppose. I've got a question from Councillor Little.
Thank you, Chair. It's actually, apologies, but it's actually on the same point as Councillor Maitland. I'm really glad, I'm really happy to see this. I think this is a bigger problem with people, and it's escalating right now with COVID. But I think it's a bigger problem than we realise. I see the case study you have where the person in question, an eviction notice sort of spurred them along to realise that this was a serious problem they really need to do something about. But what if we have like a whole family, we have a private owned home? Do we need cooperation? I mean, how much power does this legislation have? Do we need the full cooperation? Because I'm sure there are people, individuals and families out there that have this problem, have this issue, but do not see it at the moment as an issue, but it is causing a lot of difficulty for health-wise for themselves, but also for neighbours and family and friends. So just to find out whether, if we have people who do not want to engage, do not want any help, but it's really obvious that they need it, how much power does the legislation have?
Okay, Rosie, is that something you can pick up?
Yeah, that is one of the challenges. It's trying to work with people rather than enact legislation to evict. So before any eviction, we would work with housing, fire service, police to ensure that the outcomes are met. But you're quite right. If people don't meet the legislation, i.e. they're an adult at risk of harm, there are complexities to that. But again, it's about working with people. Certainly, if people are at risk of harm, we can enact the legislation and progress things a bit more under that legislation. But if they don't meet that criteria, then there are concerns, and that's a national picture as well.
Could I also add something, Chair, if that would be acceptable?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah, Councillor Little, it's a real challenge for us, but what we have found is that if we can engage our multi-agency partners, sometimes they have an easier way of making their kind of entrance into the home and getting the foot in the door. So one example would be where our fire service colleagues managed to get in to talk to the person around their own safety and their fire safety, and that led to a relationship starting to be established that allowed other services then to offer support. So Rosie's absolutely correct. Sometimes we can't enforce, but what we then can do is try and work with partners to find kind of more creative ways to try and work with either the individuals or their families to try and assist in the situation. And we hope not to have to use legislation to become involved, but clearly the case in question that's given as an example, it was as a consequence of housing taking a legal pathway that we then managed to offer support. So not something we would always want to do, but sometimes you have to use the powers of other partners to try and build that relationship and find a way to offer support. Thank you.
Councillor Little, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks very much. I think it's something that I believe that will grow. I think we'll learn from lots of different cases. This is just a new inclusion, so I think this is something we will learn. We will learn from mistakes, but we will learn from successes as well. But no, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And just, I mean, I can't see any other hands up in the chat or comments in the chat. So as we go to the recommendations, it might be helpful and indeed might help continue to raise awareness about the issue and the supports available for that. If we can maybe share a link to members or some kind of resource, I think there's plenty about, because they do get sent out and through Health and Social Care Partnership articles. So I don't know if there's a good way to do that for members of this committee and beyond, just as to highlight the issue. So if we go to the recommendations, then we have effectively we've been asked to note the biennial report, and also I think we've taken account of the challenges and opportunities to keep people safe and the effective multi-agency work and the benefits of that. So if we're happy to note the points in report 5.
Noted.
Thank you. That brings us on to item 6. So this is the Child Protection Biennial Report for 2018-20, the same period. And we have with us Gordon Pattinson, who can speak to this report today. Gordon, is there anything you want to add before we go into questions from members?
Yeah, just a couple of very quick points, if that's okay, Chair. I suppose in a similar vein to the Adult Sport Protection Biennial Report, this report covers a previous couple of years of some of the issues detailed in it may have already been presented to committee, but just I would like to acknowledge, if that's okay, that we did lose the Public Protection Committee chair during this time, and so once these reports were formally published and printed off, we formally wrote to her husband and submitted and shared the 2 copies of the report, which details some of the key work that Frida had led on during the period, and he found it a comfort, and he was very grateful that we'd sent it under the Chief Officers Group name. So I just would like to have acknowledged that, if that's okay, Chair.
Of course, Gordon, and I think as a committee, for those of us who've worked with Frida and just her contribution, I think that's completely appropriate, and thanks for doing that on behalf of the committee, I'm sure.
Okay, and just one point on page 54 of the pack, it's maybe just, it comes up as 14,289 children were referred to Children and Family Social Work throughout the period. That is more the individual number of different referrals we have received rather than unique and individual children. So I just wanted to highlight that for a point of clarity. But it is illustrative of the workload that was received during that period. But I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Gordon. Yes, obviously, yes. I mean, that's quite a lot of children if you take them as individuals, but clearly it just demonstrates, as you say, the volume of referrals and the number of things we're having to deal with in that period. Over to members then. Any questions or comments on the reports? Councillor John Campbell.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I know it's a historical document, but it does cover part of the pandemic, about 6 months of 2020. And I'm looking on page 65, the last paragraph at the bottom of the page. I'm just wondering, you know, because things are different during a pandemic or what they normally are in a sort of like a year or a couple of years. I'm just wondering if these procedures and policies, you know, is there any sort of learning that we've got out of that 6 months that that will form the future policies?
Gordon?
Yeah, the policy and procedures subcommittee sort of pended briefly at the start of the pandemic, but was reinstated quite quickly to review policies. At the start of the pandemic, we also implemented, I suppose, some emergency measures in terms of to create practice or undertake practice slightly differently, and that's obviously detailed within the report. I suppose what we will obviously do is take sort of learning from this, so that where there's any learning from changes that we've implemented during during the pandemic, that policy and procedures, which is now a formal subcommittee under the Public Protection Committee, will be taking that learning and reviewing those procedures and policies as we go along. It has a set calendar as such of when things are due for review, so that nothing will be missed, but that's certainly a more formal process under the Public Protection Committee.
Thanks very much.
Just on that point, and maybe for the benefit of members, Gordon, but obviously the Public Protection Committee it brings together a number of agencies, and while there might be learnings for the public protection oversight as a whole, what would we see come back under the auspices of social work as members? Because clearly different agencies will have different learnings, if you like, that they have to deal with within their own structures. So just for the, you know, if it's helpful or an aid to members, what would we experience of that in our own committees, if you like?
I wonder if I would be maybe better taking that one, if that's okay, Gordon. I mean, I think one of the things that we will reflect on and obviously link into the Public Protection Committee is just the changes in policies that we will need to do as a service. So we have been reviewing the policies and procedures as we go. However, we have been working under some emergency legislation, particularly around adult services, but also in child services, and we have changed some of the ways in which we have fulfilled our child protection duties in a lot of ways to be more robust through this very difficult period. So what we will do is we will have a look at the demand, we will have a look at how we have met that demand, and we will change some of the working patterns and some of the ways in which we deliver services, but that will be done in the fullness of time. And whilst we are keeping on top of all of that, and we're trying to capture everything that we've done differently, and certainly the subcommittee within public protection are a significant part of assisting us with that. As a service, we will look at this once we've come to a point where we feel that we're not in full respond, because certainly for ourselves in the senior team, which obviously Gordon is part of, we have been trying to just deal with respond continuously now for 10 months. So we're learning as we go, I think would be the best way to reflect on it. And we are making those changes that we need to make in the shorter term to deal with the crisis. But we're absolutely changing things and reflecting as we go to make sure that we will bring back whatever policy changes are required for committee to give their go ahead or not, and allow elected members scrutiny of how we will look to develop and move the service forward. Thank you.
That's thank you, Lillian. That's reassuring. So we will, as and when we have a time to do such a thing, obviously we'll get to see the parts that are most relevant to our service. So I've now got Councillor Maitland again on the chat function.
Thank you very much, Stephen. What I wanted to know, the numbers on the Child Protection Register have gone down enormously, and I understand that there is reason for that, different ways of maybe assessing risk and looking forward. I mean, Dumfries and Galloway historically had lots of children on the register, and I think that was a hangover. I think it's culturally and a hangover from the disaster we had at the beginning of this century. I just wonder, how will we know as a committee that that is absolutely the right way to go forward? Because, you know, you've reduced it really substantively, and I'm sure that's probably right. I suspect we probably did have too many children, and our risk of appetite perhaps was not totally commensurate with the actual risks. But maybe I could have some assistance with how will we know as a committee that we've got that right.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Maitland. You're sort of coming in and out there a wee bit, but I think I got the gist of it. So it was really about how will we know that their figures are correct, basically, given the history of what we've recorded. I know through multi-agency working, and obviously I'll bring in the relevant officers on this and Lillian. But I think with multi-agency working, we've certainly become more effective at accurately allocating resources where that need has been determined. So that's maybe accounted for some of the more efficient maybe use of resources. However, that's not to say that just because they've come down, they won't go up again. And I think that's what we're experiencing now. So if maybe invite Lillian to come in first on this.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Thompson. Thanks, Councillor Maitland. I will do a very brief overview if that would be helpful, and then Stephen's on the call. So Stephen's obviously our senior manager for children and families, and he could put a bit more detail. I think, Councillor Maitland, you're absolutely correct that certainly after the 2014 external care inspectorate review, we were in a very high risk situation for our children and families, and I think the register was unduly high at that point. You'll be acutely aware of the different ways in which we've tried to redesign the service and restructure the service to make sure that we actually are working with the most vulnerable children in the most appropriate way. So at the point of this report, yes, our child protection register had decreased, but certainly during the pandemic it has steadily increased, and we are dealing kind of around about 30 to 35 generally at this moment in time, which is also a reflection on some of the challenges for our families at this moment. However, moving forward, and I will let Stephen come in and give you a bit more detail on this, we are confident that the supports that we are now able to provide our families, the new policies and processes that we have basically brought in to monitor the work that we do with our children and families is making sure that as a senior team we are providing that assurance, and through the Public Protection Committee, the child protection process within that, and our ongoing external scrutiny, then I think we can give you that assurance. But I appreciate that we need to reflect on how we better give members that information. But if Chair would be acceptable, I'll ask Stephen to come in at this point. Thanks. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Lillian, and welcome, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Maitland. This is a really good point to make. And what I would add to what Lillian has said is the numbers were what we would class as artificially high, and that was because of nervousness around past practice, if we're being perfectly honest. We did an awful lot of analysis of a number of the children and families who were on the red chest previously, and we deemed that they shouldn't be there, but they did still require support. You'll all be aware that we've put a tremendous amount of training into our social work staff and some of that training into multi-agency staff about better identifying risk, but better identifying supports for families, starting with themselves, those that are closest to them. What that has meant, though, is that we haven't stopped working with that number of people. We work with them more intensively, but not always at that child protection level. And those who remain on the red chest receive our most intensive support. So one example would be, there's a family that we work with, more than one family, but where we visit 7 days a week, 3 times a day. And some of those visits are up to 3 hours at a time to really help people build skills. So I can give assurance to committee that the work that the social work staff in terms of this committee, but also the multi-agency staff put in, is absolutely fantastic. And the the workload that's behind the numbers is significant. You know, the numbers are the tip of an iceberg. The work that goes on below really is quite tremendous. So that's all I would like to add to that point, but happy to answer any more questions if required.
Thanks, Stephen. Jane, does that help address some of your concerns?
Yes, it's not really a particular concern. It's just to be sure that we ask the questions and assure ourselves that that the headline figures don't simply mask something, you know, that might actually be concerning. But I take the point. It's about use of support around the family and putting in the right level of care at the right point. I mean, how do you actually assess your success? Is it through negative, something that hasn't happened? How does this actually come forward in your own mind?
Okay, again, I'll if that's through yourself, Chair, and then I'll ask Stephen if he wants to come back in. I mean, obviously, from our own point of view, we have a whole range of monitoring processes and reporting, both to Stephen and then ultimately to myself as the Chief Social Work Officer. So we keep a very close eye on children's services. Obviously, the scars of 2014 and that external report makes it a priority for the Care Inspectorate to absolutely be asking us to provide up-to-date assurance. I have to meet every 2 weeks with the Care Inspectorate and I have to give them assurance around children's services. They're confident in everything that we are currently doing, and we don't just do what we're doing in terms of monitoring and having an overview of children's services to satisfy the Care Inspectorate or that scrutiny mechanism. We want to do things so much better for our young people and our children in Dumfries and Galloway. So for Stephen and I, it's about making sure that our managers are held accountable, that they have a structure to report through. So we have we now have an established management structure that social work have established since 2014, and that requires workers, managers of frontline staff at every level to report through that mechanism. We have a dashboard which provides us with data, and whilst you can use statistics in whichever way you feel is relevant, it does give that headline numbers, referrals, outcomes. And you know, certainly from my own point of view, if I see the register starting to rise again, I will question why. If I see children in need referrals, I will question why. We will question referrals not then going on to formal supervision, and collectively look at every aspect. Now, I would be confident to say that that process or procedure was not in place in the past in Dumfries and Galloway. So I think we can't dwell on the history. We need to recognise it, and we also need to use it as a continued guidance for us and a measurement as to where we have been and where we want to go. So certainly happy if members would find it helpful to share some of the kind of information that we use to give assurance, or bring it back to a future meeting. And I'm not sure, Chair, if Stephen would wish to add to that. Thank you.
Thanks, Lillian. I think that probably would be helpful if there's a sort of safe way of sharing that with members. Stephen, and just sort of comment, Stephen, as well. I know you've sort of certainly been instrumental in the rollout of the signs of safety, championing that for across the partnership. And it's not just the measurements, but it's also providing staff with the tools and the learning to actually help them work differently, which is obviously part of what's making a big difference in how we're managing how we use our resources. So I don't know if on the back of Lillian's comment and just on that as well, if you're wanting to come back in.
Thank you, Chair. Yep, the point I would like to make, and I think what Councillor Maitland might have been hinting at as well, is really about putting support into families. In the past, child protection across Scotland and locally would have been like episodic episodes where services went in and did things to people and came out again. And the people that you left were at a very similar base point in terms of skill set as to when you started. So you would see them come back into social work systems, and you would see cycles and generations of families coming back and forth. So our measurements, Councillor Maitland, are really around how successful we see people build their individual skills. Some of that will take time to evidence that they don't come back into social work and multi-agency systems. But the early indications in terms of the intensive family support service that we had a couple of years ago, we've mapped those families. Very few have come back into the service. That's using the exact same techniques that Councillor Thompson's just mentioned around signs of safety, where we're looking at people's strengths, building the skill sets for themselves and others around them. So we really do see improvements in families, sometimes on a daily basis, sometimes on a weekly basis, and then we see that constant increase in self-support. So that's where we look at some of the measures. Lillian's absolutely right about the policies and the procedures and the assurance. But at the heart of that, that helps families to improve, and we can evidence that certainly as we move forward and we do more local research around that.
Thanks, Stephen. Jane, I mean, hopefully that helps expand on that a little bit. And I do note that you would welcome, I think, the dashboard type data in terms of like what Lillian's offered in terms of providing that extra assurance. So is that something we can just take as an action, that we can provide a way to share that appropriately with members? I'll get that in the recommendations. But so I've got Councillor Wood's hands up.
Thank you, Chair. It was to basically raise a question on page 64 with regards to child sexual exploitation and trafficking. Now, this is not something new, and indeed it's been highlighted, the issues at Stranraer and Cairnryan as certain areas where this has been coming through. But what I want to know is, why is it that we are only now considering how to implement the National Missing Persons Framework for Scotland 2017? Why has 3 years lapsed and we're only now considering it?
Okay, thanks, Councillor Wood. Now, who wants to lead first on this one?
Gordon, probably. I'm happy to come in, but Gordon.
Thanks, Gordon.
Yeah, I may have to defer it and get back to you specifically on that one. We did. It did take a while for us to do. We did the child sexual exploitation campaign on the back of that. We implemented the framework. It was the year-long campaign, so work for that started in about 2018, and it was felt that the campaign was the first starting point for that. But I would have to get back to you specifically on anything regarding the specific framework and why it was dated 2017.
Sorry to interrupt, but just to confirm, Councillor Wood, this report covers 2018 to 2020, so that is the period for this report. So it's just the framework would have come out in 2017, and then we would have started the process of implementing it. But if you look at the period for the biennial report at page 46, it is 18 to 20. So it may be the way that we have reported this, but certainly Gordon can get that further information to you. Thank you.
Is that okay, Councillor Wood?
Yes, no, I accept and appreciate that. The only other addition I'd put onto it is, clearly it is a national missing persons framework. Is there an international one as well? And how would that tie in with the Scottish one?
Interesting question. Gordon, have you any?
No, I'm not able to answer on terms of an international missing persons framework, but I'm aware that we have undertaken a short life working group to implement the local missing persons framework, which met, in January there, and I realise Rosie is co-chair of that group, has come back on, so I may pass over to Rosie as well for an update on that one, because it's a joint adult and child missing persons framework we're implementing locally.
Okay, welcome back, Rosie. Are you wanting to come back in for a moment?
Just to say, I'm joint chair with the Child Protection Lead Officer, and we met as a multi-agency group last week, progressing that with health, police housing and other key partners. So that has started, and we have developed an online training tool, which I've been working with the lifelong learning team on. That is being tested at the moment. So there has been quite a lot of work in the last few months to get to this point. Obviously, things may have been paused for a few months through COVID pressures, but it's certainly a committed group, and they're very keen to progress. I don't know if that anything else would be required. I'm happy to answer questions.
I wonder if I could come in as well, Councillor Thompson. I mean, obviously, we will look to see if there is an international policy, and if there is, we can share that link with members. But Police Scotland are also at the forefront of doing some work through their connections with other police colleagues in the rest of the United Kingdom, and particularly around children who are coming in through the unaccompanied asylum seeking children into Kent and other avenues. So there is some national work being done in the UK, but we would need to absolutely check on whether that is there is an international one, Councillor Wood, and we'll give you that commitment. We will get a link to that if there is one. Thank you.
Is that sufficient, Councillor Wood?
Thank you very much, Chair. It's clear that Lillian picked up on exactly where I was coming from, so thank you, Lillian.
Okay, thank you. Okay, with that then, I can't see any other hands up or comments in the chat. So if we go to the recommendations, we've been asked to note obviously the amount of progress made by Public Protection Committee during the 2-year period for, as was pointed out, 2018 to 2020. Also to note the measures taken to safeguard the most vulnerable children and families, and also the priorities set for 2020 and 23 as detailed. We've also got a couple of action points there in terms of additional information, most laterally there about the international data, if you like, or work going on linking up to the local, and also the sort of dashboard type data in terms of the assurances that Councillor Maitland had sort of introduced earlier. So I think that would be helpful to members. We've got another, sorry, before we sort of finally sign that off, I've got Councillor Ferguson has just come in there with a question. Councillor Ferguson?
It's not so much a question, Chair, it's more, we've heard a lot about the work Frida's done over the years, and I'm actually wondering, as a committee, we should minute all the work rather than leave it to officers to take back. So we formally, in the recommendations for both this, I kind of go back to the previous item, but I'm sure we could cover it here so that we can recognise publicly the work that she's done over the years for us.
Yes, of course, and apologies for my clumsiness in that. I think I was trying to sort of acknowledge that when Gordon introduced it, but of course I think that's certainly something I'd want to do, and thanks for reminding me. If we can find a way to capture that recognition of Frida's contribution and obviously the tragic passing of her at the time, if the committee is happy to do that, along with noting the recommendations, are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, with that then, if we move on to the item 7, which is the Community Justice Annual Reporting Requirements 1990 to 20, report by Chief Social Work Officer. We have Vicky Binney here, who's lead contact for community justice. Vicky, is there anything you'd like to add to the report as presented?
Nothing to add at the moment, but happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you. With that then, open to members. Any questions on the Community Justice Annual Report? Councillor Howie.
Thank you, Chair. On 3.4, community payback orders increased from 463 to 586 in the past 2 years, with a presumption against prison sentences of less than 12 months. This figure will probably significantly increase. Do we have the capacity for such an increase, and who actually will fund it?
Okay, good question. Vicky, over to you.
Yeah, very good question. At the moment, it's particularly challenging because obviously due to COVID, there is a backlog in unpaid work hours. Scottish Government have looked at legislation around COVID to see what they can do about this, because that would obviously help. Currently, there hasn't been additional funding coming through to justice social work. There's been a lot more partnership work happening. Third sector colleagues have tried to help as much as possible to support the delivery of unpaid work hours, but I'm not sure if the funding will follow. Lillian would probably be able to answer that.
Yeah, I'm happy to come in if that would be helpful, Chair.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howie. I'll try and be as succinct as I can, but you know, criminal justice is funded through a Section 27 grant allocation, and you know, it's done on an analysis of workload over a 3-year period. So it's a formula that takes in rurality and takes in the actual request and requirement for us to deliver statutory orders. So we will eventually get some funding for the increase, but as is the way often and always in terms of service delivery for criminal justice, you have to work within the Section 27 allocation until you get that increased payment. So the short answer is that the funding will come from the Scottish Government through the Section 27 once the workload is analysed and the formula is implemented to provide that payment to the local authority. So we always work on, if you like, a retrospective budget. And that retrospective budget is generally about 2 years. So it's taken over a 3-year period with all different elements of the formula included. We actually have had a significant increase as reflected and as Vicky has reflected in the award of unpaid hours. So as we move forward, we will be going back to Scottish Government to ask for some additional resource to make sure we deliver unpaid work. The difficulty with unpaid work is that it's a very prescriptive element of the criminal justice Section 27 element of the budget. However, at this moment in time, we are looking at different ways, as Vicky's described, of delivering the unpaid work. We do have a huge backlog, and even with the new legislation that will take 35% of hours away from that backlog, at this moment in time, we don't know the exact figure in terms of the backlog. And just to give members a kind of an absolute example, so generally we have around 1,000 hours awarded via the court process in Dumfries and Galloway weekly for unpaid hours as part of a community payback order. And the 6 weeks that the court reopened for that short period of time between the lockdowns, we were averaging 4,500 unpaid work hours being allocated. So there is absolutely a move within the court which we would support for community disposal. However, we do have to look at how we will meet that demand, and currently the justice managers are looking at different ways in which we can try and deliver unpaid work, and we've certainly opened it up to various different ways of trying to get those individual placements. So I know that's a bit long-winded, but hopefully that gives members an overview on how we try to meet that demand in the service. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Lillian. Councillor Howie, does that help address your question?
It does, Chair. I have a further question, but I see Councillor Ingalls is in before me. If we can have a follow-up question after Councillor Ingalls.
If it's on the same subject, just come back on it. That's fine.
Yeah,
no,
happy for that.
It's a variation, Chair. It's a variation, so happily come in after Councillor Ingalls.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ingalls.
Yeah, just a quick one, Chair, on that same topic. Actually, I wondered, given it's a 25% increase, we had a figure of somewhere in the region of 30,000 outstanding hours. I'm wondering where we are at present. And I notice there is Lillian, you did mention 35%. Would it be a 35% write-off in these hours that have been allocated? Is that what the Scottish Government is proposing?
Yeah, so happy, Chair, through yourself, Councillor Ingalls. We We have been advised that there has been legislation currently being passed to allow what would be classed as low-level orders. So not for the very high-risk offenders, so domestic abuse, sex offenders, and other what would be considered high-risk tariff offenders are not included. But for what is classed as lower level crimes, then there will be a write-off for an order of up to 35%. The detail has not been fully shared with us yet, but that work is currently being done, because what we will need to do is do an analysis of those orders that we've already received from the court that fulfil that criteria. So you're absolutely correct. At one point we were sitting in over 45,000 orders. Before we had this agreement from the government, we had gone up to 57,000 unpaid hours that we were trying to work through. Obviously, at this moment in time, I don't have the figure on what that reduction, that legal reduction, will be of the 35%, but I'm certainly happy to bring that back to members when we have that tariff, when we have done that calculation, and we have had that agreement via the judiciary. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Lillian. Yeah, this is a major concern. I think the last figures that we saw in this were around the 30,000 mark, and I thought there had been a slight drop in that. We're beginning to work our way through it. Obviously, it's increasing quite dramatically. Yeah, so no, appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. And obviously, I think that's something that we would want to stay abreast of, Lillian, as you've offered there, in terms of the detail and the figures as they change. Councillor Howe, you want back in again?
Thank you, Chair. It's just maybe a fuller explanation at 3.6 of what the reconviction figures actually represent. We've got reconviction, you're talking about 27.3 and 26.1, and then individuals at 0.43. And as a supplementary to that, where does the reconviction rates of those that have previously been subjected to a community payback order sit in there? Do we have the reconviction rates of those who have already been on there? Is basically trying to gauge how successful is the community payback scheme by the number of people who basically reconvict having been submitted to it.
Okay. Vicky, I mean, I think this is really about the deep expansion around the slightly lower reconviction rates as part of the benefits of the activity, if you like. But you'll have the detail there.
Thank you for the question, Councillor. Compared to nationally, we sit slightly lower with our reconviction figures. So for instance, the reconvictions per person is 0.43 in D&G and 0.46 in Scotland as a whole, so we're slightly beneath that. A couple of years ago they changed the way they recorded it, so it would have been presented previously as 43 reconvictions per 100 people who did reconvict. The other thing with these figures, the cohort that they're looking at is a 2-year reconviction figure. So these were people who were released or finished their sentence in 2017-18, and it's followed them over a period of 2 years. When it comes to community payback orders, the reconviction rate for a community payback order in comparison to a short prison sentence is about half. They're much, much more effective. And I think that's pretty well known. Slightly different when you look at longer prison sentences, but for a short prison sentence, the reconviction figures are almost twice as high. I can get you the detail of that. I'm happy to provide a short report analysing the reconviction figures if that's required. The highest reconviction figures are also for men, and they're usually around crimes of dishonesty. Quite often that's linked back to substance misuse issues, which is one of the other reasons that as a community justice partnership, we've tried to work really closely with the Alcohol and Drug Partnership.
No, that's ideal. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
So just on that, Vicky, I mean, that might be, I know you've sort of offered a little bit more detail on that. I mean, I'm not going to sort of commit you to that, but that's certainly interesting information. Obviously, working with Alcohol and Drugs Partnership, clearly there's been a lot of headlines around, unfortunate levels of increased deaths, for example, due to drugs, etc., and in this region as well. So I mean, that's maybe not directly related, but obviously it sort of falls under the same umbrella of interest sometimes. That report might be useful at a future committee, and certainly if members are interested in that detail, that might be helpful to so we get a better understanding of it. But up first, I think, before we go to that, is Councillor Maitland.
Thank you very much, Chairman. It's a very interesting report. I mean, actually, all these reports have been interesting in this committee. But in particular, what I'm interested in, Vicky, is the issue of victims. The report is remarkably silent, I think, on the effect of these activities on victims. And I wonder if you could just give us a brief explanation, because we don't have very much information as to the effect on victims and the links between that and restorative justice, which I think we're all pretty keen on. I think the police are keen on restorative justice. But it's really, this report on outcome activity is remarkably silent. I wonder if you could talk
Okay, I'm sorry, Councillor Maitland, you seem to fade away a bit there towards the end of your question, but the first bit was, I think we maybe sort of managed to pick that up in terms of the report, but do you want to come back, maybe repeat the end of your question there, just to be sure?
Yes, I think it must be the snow in Dundrennan. It's very bad. What I was asking about is about restorative justice, the fact that the report doesn't give us any information on the links between restorative justice and community justice, and whether you can comment on the effect of your work on victims.
So did you get that, Vicky? I think it was obviously taking into account the care of the victims, if you like, as well. So okay,
no, thank you for that question, Councillor. You're absolutely right. Victims should be at the core of everything that we do, and I think as a community justice partnership, we're very aware that we need to get better at engaging with victims. I think it's also something that's in the forefront of our mind. It's not a black and white area, so quite often you're far more likely to be a victim of crime if you're involved in crime. So obviously people within the justice system have fairly often been victims themselves. We do have Victim Support Scotland as very active members of the Community Justice Partnership. But yeah, absolutely right, it's an area that we need to get better at. I think particularly over the last year and the pressures of COVID, at a national level, I chair the Community Justice Network, and we had an input from Victim Support Scotland recently, and obviously because of the backlog in cases going to court, and also then the journey onwards from that, it was highlighted that victims are starting to lose a bit of faith in the justice system, if you like, and I think it's something that we're all very aware of, particularly when you consider that a percentage of unpaid work hours may not have to be worked as such. I think it's very important that our communication with victims is good. So I can assure you that it is something we will be looking at. It's been looking at nationally, but at a local level as well. In regards to restorative justice, it's my understanding that that is used more just now with young people in youth justice setting. I am not sure, Lillian might be able to come in on this, if it's used in justice social work with adults as such. There will be restorative justice aspects in relation to the impact on victims of people offending, but I'm not sure if restorative justice is used with adults in D&G.
Happy to come in, Chair, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Vicky. Lillian, if you can add to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Maitland. In terms, restorative justice is quite a tricky area for us to work in, because there are some concerns in the legislation. Now, we do some restorative justice. I would be absolutely clear with members that it's quite piecemeal, so we will sometimes use that method of intervention through the other element that you're allowed as a consequence of a community payback order. We do use it much more with our young people, and we do that in a way of engaging with the victim of the crime and doing what you would class as true restorative justice. The difficulty often is that the structure for supporting victims involved in restorative justice is not really established, and this is a national issue. And it's an issue that we have raised time and time again with Community Justice Scotland, who hold the responsibility for the development of the RJ services. So it's something that the principles of restorative justice we try to work through within our criminal justice social work services and our youth justice services, but we certainly have a long way to go. And as somebody that's been an RJ trainer in the past, it's something that I have to say is a level of frustration, because if you do true restorative justice, then it has a very positive outcome for the victims of crime, and it's something that we would like to do on a wider intervention within justice services. What I can say at this moment in time, there is some pilot tests of change going on throughout Scotland, using what is termed as a structured deferred sentence. And that will include an element of RJ, but at this moment in time that is only being evaluated, but we are hopeful that that will be rolled out as part of a disposal for sheriffs across the country, not just in those areas that are currently being used as a test of change. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Maitland, does that assist?
Very definitely. Thank you very much. Food for thought, I think. I think we should maybe apply a little bit of pressure, actually, I can see, so that might be useful. We'll think about it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if we're getting that message there through our contacts at national level, and that's certainly something that seems to be a positive thing to promote, and clearly putting the victims at the centre of considerations around potential reductions in hours or whatever. I think that's what's being wrestled with nationally anyway, because that's clearly a concern. I don't have any other hands up that I can see or comments, so we can go to the recommendations then, which is to...
Sorry, Chair, Councillor Wood has his hand up. Oh, sorry, Chair.
Sorry, thanks, Lillian. Sorry, I just saw that there as well. Councillor Wood, do you want to come
in? Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's very good that you bring me in at this stage. It was really to do with the 7 challenges on page 123. And while it has identified the challenges, it hasn't always identified how they're going to take or how they're going to address them in the future. Would it be possible to expand on all of the challenges identified?
Yep, sorry, I am just getting to that page. Yeah, so yes, I could go through them for you if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, presumably that's what you're asking for, Councillor, but I was just furiously scrolling there as well to try and reach the same part in the report. But that's section 7 challenges on page 123, or page 45 or 46 of the actual newsletter. Is that suitable if you're able to go through them, Vicky?
Yeah, of course. The first challenge was around us highlighting the fact that this is a single officer post. I think there's only 2 areas in Scotland that don't have a single officer post, and that's Glasgow, who managed to attract some more funding towards the Community Justice Partnership, and the Ayrshires, which have come together as 3 Ayrshires, so they have 3 times the budget and have a team of 3 staff. So this has been highlighted since the local model for community justice has been in place. However, there doesn't seem to be any funding coming to change that at all. I think locally, we've been very committed to community justice since the beginning. We were one of the first areas in Scotland to have the Community Justice Partnership Manager post as a permanent post, which shows the commitment locally. And also community justice sits very well alongside public protection, and I work closely with the other lead officers in adult support and protection, child protection and violence against women. So that means that in future, if I was ever to be off with an unexpected accident, somebody would be able to pick up some of that work, which happened to an extent last time it happened. In regards to the timing of this annual report, again, this has been flagged up several times to Community Justice Scotland. they have said there's nothing they can do in relation to that at the moment because of the timing of when the reports have to be laid before Parliament. It's also a challenge for us as local community justice partnerships because Community Justice Scotland produced their own annual report using all the information from local areas which they consult upon. Last year, as a network, we wanted to have a joint response to that, and we weren't given sufficient time to do that, which is problematic to us as a network, I think. And we're hoping to do it again this year. We've kind of been a bit more organised with the timings. But yeah, Community Justice are aware of it. They don't really seem to be making any changes to the timing, so we just have to try and adapt as a local partnership. It's difficult because data and statistics are available at different times throughout the year, so we can't always get the data that we need. However, the outcome and performance framework at a national level is being reviewed. We're looking at a new set of core data, and that might improve things in regard to timings of the reports. The next big challenge, obviously, was COVID-19. So what that meant for us, as I'd highlighted in the covering report, was that we had to put our outcomes within our 3-year plan almost on hold whilst partners reacted operationally, which they absolutely had to the COVID pandemic. We presumed as a result of that there would be some leeway with reports, and we would get an extension with our community justice outcome improvement reports and to reflect the challenges since COVID, but that hasn't been the case. We've made a decision as a local partnership that we'll be extending our local plan regardless of the position nationally. However, we've been told since that Community Justice Scotland will be taking a pragmatic approach, so I'm hoping that they will support that decision at a local level. And finally, the year-on-year funding. It does indeed remain a challenge. We've had funding confirmed again for 2021-22 with a slight uplift of £12,500. We got that towards the end of last year. It was highlighted that that should be used to support justice social work colleagues to get through the unpaid work backlog, and there was agreement from our local community justice partnership that that would be used to purchase devices, data and resource packs for blended learning for people who were trying to get through some of the other activity aspects of their unpaid work at home. Because we've got some more time to think about the next 12,500 additional money that we get from the 1st of April, there might be more creative ways that we can use it. But because it's such a small amount, in the great scheme of things, it's actually quite difficult to utilise it in really innovative ways. But we'll be thinking about that as a partnership moving forward.
Thanks, Vicky. That's quite a lot of detail there. Councillor Wood, is that helpful?
It is helpful, but I was also wondering about what this committee could do to help support and influence better outcomes, and possibly to look to yourself as the chair of our committee to write to the various bodies and see if we can't support Vicky and what she's doing. Is that a possibility, or is it out with our control?
I mean, it's really up to the committee as a whole what we do within our delegations, but certainly I think I know we've certainly had to hold back reports to the committee, which we would normally have had because of delays at a national level in terms of publishing things. So that's certainly something that's seems to be it's certainly a source of frustration, and I can understand that. And I think sometimes if there's if it appears that there's a duplication or just a timing issue that's preventing things going forward, then I think that's maybe something I can liaise with through the Chief Social Work Officer and Vicky, just about how maybe best to do that. But certainly I'd want to ensure that we weren't getting derailed or delayed in terms of being able to actually do meaningful work as a result of what could be improved at a national level. So I'm certainly happy to go forward on that basis, if that's something I can pick that up with the Vice Chair, Lillian and Vicky after the meeting perhaps. But if that's of help to you, Andrew, and I can certainly circulate any letter I'll send to the committee members.
I think that would be helpful, because I believe this committee now needs to start to actually have outcomes and actions. And today we've sat down, gone through various reports, noting. Now, we don't want to be part of a committee that's just rubber stamping, and we need to, in actual fact, be a committee that also influences and supports our team. So that's why I'm putting forward that suggestion. I mean, it's ridiculous that we've got a situation whereby software that has been getting shared between our partners isn't compatible. And we've got that in the council as well. You know, it just is bizarre that we are working in that situation after so long. So once again, maybe that's something we could influence.
Well, one step at a time, probably, and I think I think there's some valid points that have been raised about what's within our remit. So that's certainly something that I'll discuss, and then obviously come back to members about. But I think just in terms of the report that we've got in front of us today, there's certain things that we're required to do or obliged to do in terms of our reporting, and to be honest, I think social work services as a whole, along with the rest of the health and social care sector, is very busy, let's say. And I think there's a time when we'll get the reports back that we can actually take decisions, whether it's about budgets or activities, and the chief social worker officer will support us in that. So yeah, I mean, we've got what's in front of us today. I take your point, but I think we'll, given that that's the last sort of comment on the matter, I think we'll just go to the recommendations and allow everybody to get back to their normal work, if you like. So I'll just scroll way back up again. So we've got the report there in front of us. We've been asked to note it, we've considered it, and we've also been asked to endorse the report and also the newsletter. So obviously the newsletter is a very helpful format, I think, in terms of actually getting across the wide variety of information from across the partners, etc. So if we're happy to go with the recommendations and agree them, any members otherwise minded, are we happy to do that?
Happy, agree, Chair.
I think that's another comment in. Oh yeah, so thanks, John Campbell. That's just commenting that you've agreed. That's fine. Okay, and just within that as well, there is a sort of action, I think. Vicky, I don't know if it'd be easier just to do like a briefing in terms of the reconviction data. I don't know if it needs to be a sort of full report as such, but I think just even breaking down the data for the benefit of members, a sort of short briefing might be helpful, and then obviously questions can arise from that if members want to come back to you. Okay. That brings us on to the final item, which is to note the minutes of the meetings of the two public protection committees. Are we happy to do that?
Agreed.
Okay. Councillor Wood, got your hand up?
Thank you, Chair. It was really just to note that the Vice Chair has been absent at both the last two meetings. And is it possible that we can put in place a substitute so that you get the support required at that meeting?
Well, to be fair, thanks for raising that, but the Vice Chair is very supportive to me, and I think what's actually happened there is the Public Protection Committee reviewed its membership, and part of that review was actually, because it was starting to, while it was very useful, there was quite a large number of people having to attend for various reasons, so it was actually more efficient to slightly reduce that, and it meant that I think the number of councillors due to attend was something like 1.3 or something like that. So what we opted to do was alternate meetings. So you will see that Councillor McKee attends some meetings where I don't, and vice versa. I think the last two, though, I might have attended for various, just because of clashes of committees. But be assured that the Vice Chair is fully supportive going forward, and we do discuss the Public Protection Committee and who's attending for every meeting.
I wonder, Chair, if it would be helpful that we recorded that differently, because it's not actually an apology. You're correct, it's a membership requirement that only one elected member attends at that point. So it might be the way that we've recorded it in the minute, if that would be helpful, Councillor Wood and Chair. Thank you.
Once again, Lily, you're on the ball. if we're going to have reports like this, please try and make them as explanatory as possible. That'd be really good. Thank you.
I'll make sure that happens. Thank you.
You think I would dodge some of the issues, Andrew?
Not at all, Joe. I have every confidence in you. It's just that that we're all susceptible to not being able to make meetings, and it's just I wanted to make sure that we could in actual fact have substitutes if required. That was all. So take care.
I'll let you off.
Well spotted, Councillor Wood, and thanks, Lillian, for offering that correction. And I should say that there's no further business for this committee. There's no additional items. Thanks all for your attendance today and your forbearance. And best of luck to you, and take care in your endeavours and stay safe. So thank you.